Hi all. Welcome to a Things Max Plus video on this particular thing, the Bond in Motion exhibit at the Peterson Automotive Museum here in Los Angeles, California. The last time I got some good visits in at the Peterson was, of course, pre-pandemic, like everybody else, when their featured exhibit was Hollywood Dream Machines. I'll leave a link to that video here. That exhibit was likely the greatest I have ever seen at the museum, as it combined cars with one of my other favorite subjects, screen-used movie artifacts. So, after everyone in LA behaved well enough for about 18 months, indoor venues were able to reopen to the public, and the Peterson, knew the success of Dream Machines, so they wanted to get museum goers back into the building, and so they started off with Bond in Motion. Billed as the largest official Bond vehicle exhibit in the United States, you can imagine the excitement you might feel getting to see a stable of vehicles used in one of the greatest film franchises of all time, right? There's just one problem. It was a little disappointing. I'm going to go ahead and elaborate on this as we move forward, but let's talk about what was there. The first car you see is this silver birch Aston Martin DB5, but it is not the car from Goldfinger. Rather, it's the non-canonically inexplicable one that seems to pop up in films from time to time, beginning with GoldenEye back in 1995. The plaque at the base of the car claimed the car had been used in 5 Bond films, but was still somehow vague at best as to whether or not it was this car sitting on the stand or just that a DB5 was used. All that being said, it was gorgeous, even if I am personally a DB6 guy, but it was utterly spotless, and that also kind of made me skeptical as to whether or not this had been used in films. Moving on, you then come across a tow sled scuba thing from Thunderball, as well as a rather large empty spot, where there's a explainer of the exhibit along with a supercut of scenes involving James Bond and his vehicles throughout the decades. But this spot is suspiciously empty, like there was something that was supposed to be there. And I have a theory about this. I think the Peterson was trying to get the Diamonds Are Forever moon buggy, but couldn't, and this is where it would have been parked. Incidentally, the moon buggy's history has been a pretty easy one to follow. It was built by Dean Jeffries, used in Diamonds Are Forever, then left out to rot, as a lot of production-used stuff is. It was found by a fan, restored, leased to Planet Hollywood in the 90s for their Las Vegas restaurant, which was inside the shops at Caesar's Palace, put up for auction a number of times, never meeting its reserve, and eventually bought back by Planet Hollywood and put back in the Vegas restaurant, and then finally sold via auction by the Planet Hollywood owner Robert Earl through Profiles in History. Now, at this point, the trail's gone cold for me, so it's probably in the hands of a private collector who does not want its location known or to loan it out, but if you know anything more about it at this point, be sure to say so down in the comments. Anyway, after the scuba tow sled, you then get to see a helicopter miniature from You Only Live Twice, a model jet from Goldfinger, and the red 69 Mercury Cougar from On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And I would say this is the first cool car on display. Just my opinion. From there, the next items on display include Blofeld's Bathos Sub, which was made by George Barris, a 3-wheeler ATV from a chase scene, and the Mustang Mach 1 from Diamonds Are Forever that drove on 2 wheels and then somehow flipped to the other 2 wheels during a chase through an alley in Las Vegas. See the movie. It's a great example of a continuity fix. So now we're leaving the Connery films, which technically we didn't start with that DB5, but I am being technical, and we're moving into the Roger Moore movie vehicles. Next to the Mustang from Diamonds is a boat that made a jump in Live and Let Die. It's a boat. Okay. And behind the boat, if we turn around, we'll see the AMC Hornet that did the spiral barrel roll jump over the bridge in The Man with the Golden Gun. Finally, we have an important car from the films here, because this was a package stunt that was bought from Chip Milligan and Raymond McHenry's work on the Astro Spiral Jump, which was the first stunt to utilize computer simulations to prove that something could be done. It was a cool vehicle to see there. As we move along, we now keep walking and come across one of the submersible Lotus Esprits from The Spy Who Loved Me, which they call Wet Nelly, but here we have some issues again. First of all, technically this isn't Wet Nelly. Wet Nelly was the functional Lotus submersible, which is owned by Elon Musk. People know about this. It was all over the internet when he bought it. And then second, the plaque for this car claims that this submersible is the one used for the scene of it launching the underwater missile from its rear hatch in blowing up the helicopter. The only problem is you can't screen match that, as the Lotus in the exhibit has a singular hole for the missile to come out of it, and in the film, there appear to be 4 holes, or at least 3 cosmetic and 1 functioning, and this car has 1 central hole. So either this is not that vehicle, it had a rear hatch fabricated to replace a missing one, or it's a replica altogether. This is another example of a vehicle that looked to be in too good condition to have actually been used in production, and I suspect it was actually just used for promotions around the film. But as with other stuff here, that's just my speculative opinion. You can draw your own conclusions based on visual evidence. Next to the Lotus was a wet bike, which, was okay, there was that. And again, the plaque was a little vague as to whether this was used in filming or just one that belonged to the owner of the wet bike company who donated it to the exhibit. And to the left of what I'm going to call Not Wet Nelly was the rather nifty and gadget-filled boat Roger Moore captained in Moonraker. It was still super sparkly and in remarkable condition, but then again, it was a really nice boat, even by modern standards, and so likely it received a lot of TLC as it moved through its chain of title, winding up with the Ian Fleming Foundation. More on them later. We're going to keep on walking, and we're now looking at a cluster of vehicles from For Your Eyes Only, and these include a rather large fiberglass submersible prop, half a Citroen CV3 used for filming interiors, and a beach buggy. We're now getting into what I like to call prop vehicle refuse territory, stuff that doesn't really matter all that much, like this tuk-tuk from Octopussy. And I mean, even if this stuff is VIN matched, it just doesn't have the same kind of fizz as the Q branch vehicles from the films. This is the kind of stuff that's pretty easy to get your hands on, I suppose. Now, I did write a separate blog post to this video, and you'll find the link in the description below. And in there, I kind of point out that there were a lot of these things I just didn't even care to photograph, because they just didn't really seem that interesting to me. For example, they're like this scuba tow sled from Never Say Never Again. But then we get on to something else that's pretty cool here, which is the V8 saloon from the Living Daylights, and I really love Aston Martin V8s from the 70s and the 80s. I just think they're really cool cars, and even cooler as a Bond car with the gadgets than was the DB5 when it was in Goldfinger. But there's 2 things about this car. One is interesting and the other is kind of disappointing. And they're one and the same because it's not an actual Aston Martin V8. It's a fiberglass effect shell with V8 trim pieces. Even the wheels and tires aren't real. Instead of being the car that was driven by Timothy Dalton, it's the car filmed for transformation shots. And so while it's an interesting piece from the standpoint of being an effects prop, it's not an Aston Martin. And then overhead, we have a Cessna plane used in License to Kill. I guess the interesting thing about this is that it was actually towed in the air by a helicopter for its filming scenes. Continuing on, we have a Cagiva motorcycle from GoldenEye and a BMW motorcycle from Tomorrow Never Dies, and we're now deep in Brosnan territory, and I'm not sure how special those bikes are, but anyway, on to another boat, and this time it is the jet boat from The World Is Not Enough. And it would seem there are a lot of these boats made, as images of them on display are really not hard to find on the internet, and auction houses seem to be auctioning them constantly. So this one belongs to the Ian Fleming Foundation and claims that 15 were built and 6 remain, or is it 7? Because if you look at their description, it kind of goes back and forth. Point is, there's a lot of these. Then behind the boat are 2 BMWs that might as well be any BMWs, and I really don't think they spent much, if any, time on film sets. The first is the 750IL, ostensibly used in Tomorrow Never Dies, but probably not really, as the sunroof missile launcher bears not so much resemblance to what we see in the film, and the interior is straight up a BMW. And the Q-Spec vehicle was all kinds of hacked up inside to allow for the blind drive system that made this car appear to race around the parking structure while Bond drives it from his cell phone. And we know that actual car exists, as Supercar Blondie got a chance to visit one and showcase its functionality. So it's clear to me that this is probably just a sedan that sat outside premieres or publicity events, or there may have been a scene in the movie where Brosnan just parks in a parking space. I don't know, but this certainly, the sunroof missiles were added after the fact. They were not part of this build, or part of the build for the Q car. And then there's the Z8, supposedly from The World Is Not Enough, and again, way too clean to have ever even been touched by actual fingers, let alone survive a movie production. So again, I'm skeptical as to this car's contributions to the franchise. Okay, so we're now leaving the BMW era at Bond behind and moving to vehicles from Die Another Day. And the first we have is this Snowmobile that apparently doesn't hold a lot of intrinsic value as people are allowed to sit on it and have their pictures taken, which was not the case in earlier iterations of the Bond in Motion exhibit. It was behind a railing, so I don't know, maybe they just decided they didn't care much about it. But from there, we see this Aston Martin V12 Vanquish supposedly used in the big Ice Lake, Ice Palace chase scene. And I have a lot of issues with this vehicle. Again, I'm not sure it was actually used in production, but I think it was a publicity vehicle modified to look like it was. If you've watched the behind the scenes documentary on the DVD from Die Another Day, those cars got beat up something fierce. And again, its condition is too good for any of the cars that survived filming on the ice lake. And when you couple with that the fact that the plaque the Peterson had displayed listed his engine as a V12, we have another problem. It's relatively well known by Bond and Aston Martin enthusiasts that the Vanquish is used in the lake chase scenes where, in fact, Vanquish chassis, but were powered by Ford Explorer V8s and four-wheel drive systems. So if this is a car that was used for filming, why not state that fact about it? It is quite possible it was a publicity vehicle built to look like it was used in the film, and given that it is toured all over and put in numerous displays over the years, I think it'd be okay to admit that. In fact, the Peterson has just such a vehicle. The '89 Batmobile, which they acknowledge was one of several built after the film to help promote its release. Yes, this Vanquish has a heavily modified interior, but again, if you look through the tinted windows inside, it is super clean in there. And other photos around the web will show you the same thing with the windows down and the doors open. Not so much as a stain on the carpet, nor any loose panels, or any kind of scratches or scuffs. I have to speculate that, at best, the hood, gun things, and grill missiles were pulled from a production-used VX vehicle and added to this publicity vehicle. Behind the Vanquish, however, is a car that does appear to be the real deal, which is the XKR that Zhao drove from the same film. And here you can see the interior. It's well worn, with stickers denoting functions and cables running everywhere and exposed frame sections, and the plaque which accurately describes the powertrain, which was also the Ford V8 with four-wheel drive. So why was that so hard? It would seem that the Peterson is honest about the cars it owns, but it may be contractually obliged by the owners of loaned vehicles to put the descriptions down that they want there, even if they aren't true. And given that the Peterson is a nonprofit learning institution, i.e. a museum, this is a bit troubling. Next up, we loop around for the contemporary Bond cars. 3 Aston Martins from the Daniel Craig era, although it's a bit of a reverse order based on how the loop back goes, with the DB10 from Spectre being the first car that we see. There are supposedly only 2 of these in existence, and the other one is in a private collection. I actually saw the other one in England back in 2016, and there is a subtle difference between the two. This car was definitely built for publicity. It's known that's the case. 10 were built and 2 were actually made specifically for that purpose. In other iterations of the Bond in Motion traveling exhibit, they actually have the chopped up DB10s that were used for filming interiors, stunts, and otherwise. Now in front of the DB10 is the scraped up doorless DBS V12 from the epic opening chase scene from Quantum of Solace. And I'm inclined to believe that this was a screen used car, given its condition, although up close you'll notice the damage is all simulated. If you look at those bullet holes, you'll reveal that they aren't even squibbed. They're just cut out holes in the leather, but it really does look good. And finally, we end on the rolled DBS from Casino Royale. This car has certainly seen better days, but hey, it set some records and died for Queen and Country, so good for you. You gotta be pretty sure they used this in the film, because I don't really think you can go rolling Aston Martins just for the purposes of publicity. If you hear me cough or clear my throat, it's because I'm getting over a little cold. But as I was walking through the exhibit, I realized something about these vehicles, literally all of them, with the exception of one, which is that they all came from one of only 2 sources, the Ian Fleming Foundation or Eon Productions. And this struck me not so much as curation, but rather like a showcase. And I wasn't really all that impressed once this became clear. And another odd thing is that the Ian Fleming Foundation isn't some sort of UK-based heritage trust, but rather a non-profit group of collectors with a hangar based in Santa Barbara, California, that buys up Bond vehicles, no matter how obscure or irrelevant, for the purpose of renting them out to special events. They'd probably do your birthday or wedding or bar mitzvah, whatever you got going. They're there. So it seemed a tad sketchy or underwhelming in that regard. And to go back to my earlier point, Eon Productions, they only sent vehicles that I speculate were likely not used or barely used in the films, because they know full well the intrinsic value of screen-used Bond items. So I want to give the Peterson the benefit of the doubt. I want to believe they tried harder than this. They've had featured exhibits that, to my eye, in the past have come from far more disparate collections for display. And the example of that I love to use is Hollywood Dream Machines. That is, I think, one of the best things they've ever done. And apart from the Deckard coupe in that particular exhibit, the descriptions on the plaques were accurate. And now, as I mentioned earlier, the Deckard coupe plaque may have been a requirement of the loan from the Miami Police Museum, assuming it was a loan and not part of the Peterson collection now, which I hope it is. But seeing as how that wasn't accurate, similar to the Vanquish V12, it's unsettling. It's not history, film history for that matter. And but going back to the Bond exhibit, there was a lot more that could have been included here. Based on what I've seen of the touring exhibit in other countries. Now, maybe it wound up as part of the Vault Tour, which I didn't do, or maybe the museum simply couldn't afford to ship more from the UK. But if it was the latter, then the blame falls squarely on the sponsors, DHL and Hagerty, for not giving the museum more flexibility in this regard. And, instead they had to fall back on a local collection of Bond vehicles of far lesser significance to fill out the space, like a tuk-tuk. I don't know. But what I can say is that this was a nice exhibit, if far from the best selection of film vehicles I've ever seen. And it was really great to get back to the museum after 18 months of lockdown. If you are a fan of the Bond films, you know them well, and you've done your research on the cars, you will find this exhibit underwhelming. If you're a fan of the Bond films and you don't know much about the Bond films, you may find this exhibit amazing. But I just want to warn you. I want to let you know what your expectations should be going into it. Apart from that, they've got a hypercar exhibit coming up to Peterson, so hoping to go back for that soon. So I'll just say thank you for watching. I hope this was informative, if not the most positive thing I've done, but hopefully I was fair in terms of my review of it. So anyway, I'm going to go back to trying to get better here from the flu, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye. Made it through.